Colorado Rockies. Some years ago, a young man familiar with these mountains began to harvest the natural herbs that grow here to make tea. In time, he developed a small business, bringing his herbs down from the mountainside and selling them locally. The business grew into a company called Celestial Seasonings. Operating in the shadow of these mountains, Celestial Seasonings did well. The product was right, promotion successful, but the firm's growth was limited because there was no way to reach the larger market of people beyond the mountain range. It was like standing on the edge of a chasm. On the far side were the customers, and the company's success depended on finding a way to get their products to them. In order to do that, Celestial Seasonings would have to develop a distribution strategy.
Hello, I'm Alex Burton, and this is the Business File. Distribution strategy is one of the critical elements of marketing, which itself is one of the major functions of a business. Now, you can define marketing as a group of interrelated activities designed to identify consumer needs and develop, promote, price, and distribute goods and services to satisfy these needs at a profit. As a part of marketing, distribution strategy involves the physical distribution systems and channels used to place the product in the customer's hand. And that means getting the product to the right place at the right time. Now, a little later in this program, we're going back to the Rockies for a visit with a man who founded Celestial Seasonings, so he can tell us how he developed his distribution strategy. First, though, we're going to investigate the importance, objectives, and components of our subject by visiting with two professors of business, and I'd like to welcome them now. First, from Penn State University, we have Professor John Coyle, Professor of Business Administration. Professor Coyle, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Alex. It's very nice to be with you here today.
Our second guest is coming to us from another part of the country, East Lansing, Michigan. He is Professor Donald Bowersox, Professor of Marketing and Logistics there at the Graduate School of Business, Michigan State University. Professor Bowersox, thank you for joining Professor Coyle and me.
Alex, enjoy having you on the campus.
My first question is for Professor Coyle. Would you begin by explaining the role and the importance of distribution strategy in the overall marketing strategy?
Well, today I think it's taking on increasing importance in many companies throughout the United States. And specifically, I would zero in on the area of customer service, because I think it's important to recognize that in talking about distribution and marketing, that customer service is really the final thing as far as getting the product to the customer and enhancing future sales. When a customer orders 3 products for Friday, they don't want 5 on Monday or 4 on Thursday. They want the right product at the right time, in the right place, in the right quantity, and in the right condition. So I think that's the primary focus, as I would see distribution strategy as it relates to marketing today.
Professor Bowersox, that is the role and importance of distribution strategy. Would you tell us, what are the elements involved in distribution?
In a general sense, one has to divide distribution up into the parts that deal with logistics of getting products to a place, and those that deal with the selection of channels or the institutions, often called intermediaries, that people deal with in solving their marketing problems. From the viewpoint of the institutions, one has to be very selective in picking those companies to do business with that they feel can help carry out their marketing mission.
Dr. Coyle, we know that goods have to follow some route as they travel from the company that produces them to the customer. What are the specific distribution channels?
Well, in looking at distribution channels, I think it's important to recognize that there are 2 basic types, one that deal with consumer products and one that deal with industrial products. And because of the difference in those 2 types of products, I think there are going to be different strategies in approaching your distribution channels. Now, if we look at the consumer products, it's important to recognize that we're talking about institutions that are going to move that product forward to the ultimate customer. And they could include such things as wholesalers or retailers. You might have manufacturer representatives or sales agents or even brokers in some instances. As far as the industrial products are concerned, often you don't need as an elaborate of a distribution channel in dealing with industrial products, and in fact some manufacturers obviously deal directly with their customers, but there are occasions even for industrial products when you may have to put in place a channel of distribution, but you usually have more control over it because of the nature of the kind of product you're dealing with.
Well, your answer serves as a good introduction to an animated piece that we've developed to describe the types of distribution channels, and I'd like for you and Dr. Bowersox to watch it with us.
Distribution channels and the organizations that compose them serve as pipelines businesses use to move goods to the ultimate customer. There are 2 basic types of channels, those for consumer goods and those for industrial goods. A manufacturer of industrial goods can choose any one of 4 channels to reach his customers. The shortest and most practical channel is one with no middlemen at all. It's often the best route to take if goods are difficult to handle, the market segment is small, or customers need to be trained to use the product. The most complicated channel involves agents or brokers and wholesalers. The agent or broker acts as a representative who sells to the wholesaler. The wholesaler, in turn, gets products to the final buyer. Smaller firms are likely to find it necessary to use these 4 steps for distribution. Manufacturers of consumer goods also have multiple channels to choose from. The direct channel, manufacturer to consumer, is used least often. But products like encyclopedias are sold direct, and so are the goods marketed through some mail-order catalogs. The longest consumer distribution channel puts an agent or broker, a wholesaler, and a retailer between the manufacturer and his ultimate buyer. Agents or brokers sell to wholesalers, who aid in allocating products to the retailers, and finally, retailers get the products to the consumer.
So those are the basic channels that businesses have to choose from. I'd like to go to Dr. Bowersox in East Lansing. Would you tell us, why do businesses use middlemen like agents and wholesalers?
There are some basic functions that must be performed to carry out a marketing strategy. There's an old saying in marketing that you can eliminate the middleman, or middle person, I guess, in today's vocabulary, but you cannot eliminate the function. Certain basic functions of marketing must be accomplished. Many businesses find it's to their advantage to form partnerships, not legal partnerships, but marketing partnerships with other businesses in order to accomplish the total marketing of their products. Those other businesses, therefore, perform some of the functions that are necessary, such as helping take some of the risk in inventory, perhaps helping perform the transportation or the storage, or perhaps it's nothing other than the local promotion of a product.
I'd like to follow up on that by asking you, Dr. Coyle, to get very specific about 2 of the better-known middlemen. What do wholesalers and retailers actually do?
Well, a wholesaler, generally speaking, is an institution or a company that buys in large quantities, usually directly from a manufacturer, and then in turn sells to the retailer who sells the ultimate customer. And the wholesaler in that case is kind of a middleman and sells to the retailer in smaller quantities at a higher price than what the company quantities at an even higher price, taking advantage of their markup. Now, in today's marketplace, there often is a blur because we have some very, very large retailers who have become so large that they, in fact, buy in wholesale quantities themselves and have become so strong that they have a major influence on even some of the manufacturers.
All right. What if you were going to design a distribution channel? Dr. Bowersox, what factors would you consider?
Well, it all starts with my basic product. I have to look at who is ultimately going to buy that product. And then there are certain classes that take into consideration then my product, the market I'm trying to service, who is my competition, and what kind of exposure do I really want to get geographically of the product. Those factors ultimately lead us down to selecting a style of distribution. And in the trade, those are often identified as either being intensive, meaning that we're going to try to pick a few stores to represent us in each community, or we might be exclusive, in that we would look for a franchise or a particular outlet to represent us on an exclusive basis in a market. That all depends on exact particular outlet to represent us on an exclusive basis in a market. That all depends on exactly who it is that's going to ultimately buy that product.
What about that, Dr. Coyle? Can you add anything to it?
Well, there are a number of things. First of all, let's simplify it. We might talk about long channels and short channels. Long channels would be where there are a number of institutions between the manufacturer and the ultimate customer. In other words, a number of intermediaries. A short channel would be where there are one or maybe even selling direct to the ultimate customer. Now, in trying to make that decision, there are a number of things you'd have to consider. One would be, how much control do you want to exercise over the product as it moves through the marketplace? If you have a long channel, then it's more difficult to exercise control, unless you are dealing with a very, very exclusive type of product where people have to buy it from you, and when they buy that kind of product, they associate it with you, that particular company. So the longer the channel, the less control. The other thing you have to think about is the geographic area you're trying to serve. If you're dealing in an area like the Northeast, where you have a large concentration of population, it's easier to have shorter channels because you have this population you can serve directly yourself, maybe through some retailers. On the other hand, if you're serving some place like Montana, where your population is very dispersed, it's much more difficult to have those shorter channels in those kinds of areas.
Excuse me, but now in the time that we have left, I'd like to address another element of distribution strategy, the physical distribution system itself. Dr. Bowersox, I'd like to ask you first, what specific activities are involved in moving the goods through the channels?
Now we're getting directly into an area that's often called physical distribution or business logistics. That's the physical movement of the product from the manufacturer's shipping docks down to the retail stores, and sometimes directly to the consumer's home in certain kinds of distribution systems. There we have to take into consideration order processing systems, warehousing and storage systems, transportation, inventory management. They go together to sort of form a cherry pie of logistics.
Okay, I'd like to ask Dr. Coyle, would you give us some detail on these?
Usually transportation is the largest single component in terms of cost of overall logistics cost, often resulting in about 55% of the total logistics bill. When we talk about transportation, we're talking about the selection of an appropriate mode of transportation and a carrier within that mode to get the product to the next person in the logistics channel. In today's highly deregulated marketplace, the buyers of transportation service have a lot of alternatives to choose among and some blendings among the modes of transportation. Without regulation, we've had a blurring here, and so the buyer has an excellent opportunity nowadays to make choices to give them the kind of service that they need. The second would be inventory, which means how much we should manufacture at one time or how much we should buy at one time, when we should buy it or when we should manufacture it, and where we should locate that inventory. And that relates to our third part, which would be warehousing. And the question here is whether we should have a centralized system or a decentralized system. How many warehouses should we have? Should we have, like a Corning Glass, have 2 or 3 warehouses, or should we be like a Frito-Lay with 170 distribution points? Now that obviously relates back to the nature of the product you're dealing with and the competitiveness of the market. The more competitive the market, usually the more warehouses we're going to have. But the warehousing function is a very, very important one also in affecting your overall cost. Another part of that would be materials handling. Materials handling within the warehouse and the interface between the transportation agency and the warehouse. And then we'd have to talk about the order processing, which is the signal for the logistics system to respond to a customer's order.
Dr. Carl, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to break in there as we have run out of time, but thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
And in East Lansing, Michigan, Dr. Bowersox, we appreciate your taking the time to be with us.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's been my pleasure.
Now we're going back to the Colorado Rockies for a look at a company that's been very successful at putting a distribution strategy together. And with us in his office in Boulder, Morris Siegel, president and founder of Celestial Seasonings. Mr. Siegel, we're looking forward to this talk with you.
Well, Alex, thank you. It's really nice having you all here, and it's fun to share our story.
My first question is about your products. Would you describe them?
Celestial Seasoning sells herb tea. Right now, we're expanding our horizons a bit, but the specific products that we sell majorly are a line of herb teas.
What are your intended target markets for herb tea?
Our target market has tended to be the health-conscious men and women. Our number one buyer tends to be women between the ages of 18 and 49, our largest consumer group, and their families. And the second largest consumer group, or buyers, tend to be women above that age, and they tend to drink more. They're heavier consumers, but they're not the most, it's not the broadest audience that we appeal to. So about 65% of our consumers are women, younger and more health conscious.
In the early days, when you founded the company, what distribution problems did you face?
When I started Celestial, the health movement was just beginning. People were beginning to realize that it was cheaper and more fun to stay healthy than to get sick and go to the doctor. But you were looked at as a bit odd to be jogging at 7 o'clock in the morning in 1970. The movement just hadn't caught on. Today, there are 40% of the adult Americans exercising on a regular basis. Back then, there was maybe 8% or some phenomenally low number. So we had a problem that our product was at the edge of the health movement that was just beginning to get accepted. Channels of distribution were not easy. The only market that we could go into readily was the health food stores. And they had old lines of herb tea that had been around for 50 years.
Well, how'd you solve the problem?
My wife and I got in a car in 1970 and drove from here to New York City and stopped in about every health food store between here and there, and then most of the stores in the city and in part of the East Coast. We took orders directly from the stores to get started.
Of course, that's not the end of the story. Where have you evolved to today in solving your distribution dilemma?
We have 3 distinct channels of distribution that have evolved because of consumer demand.
Well, let's look at that. How did you respond to consumer demand in terms of building a distribution system?
There were distributors that serviced the stores instead of the manufacturers servicing the stores. And we convinced the distributors it was to their benefit financially to carry our line of products.
Okay, channel number 1 was health food distributors. Where did you go from there?
From there, we needed to grow, and also consumer demand was growing, and the next logical step was to go into the supermarkets. We chose 2 different systems. That was grocery distributors and directly into the chain warehouses.
Using grocery distributors and directly into chains, Mr. Siegel, why did you select those 2 particular channels?
From near the beginning of the company, we realized that the supermarket end of our business would be our biggest part of our business, and we had to find an easy road in there, or a road in there. There were no easy roads into the supermarkets.
All right, let's talk about each of those. What about grocery distributors? What have they done for you?
They have caused us no end of problems over the years because distributors tend to be very good at a grocery distributor getting a display into a store, doing a wonderful job on special events. But they oftentimes will go out of stock. Because of the margins that it takes to run their business, they're higher priced, so it puts our product at a price that we don't like.
What about going directly into the chain supermarkets?
When you go direct into the supermarket, they have their pros and cons. They tend to pass your price features on more, but they don't tend to do anything special for your product like build displays. They oftentimes make the products lower priced, which causes great problems with our health food stores.
All in all, how do the channels compare one against the other?
All the channels of distribution that we have their clear sets of opportunities and problems. They're trade-offs financially. Grocery distributors tend to be very merchandising oriented. They can do a lot of special things. Whereas with a grocery direct network, you can get your product in many more stores in general than a grocery distributor will do. Our competition can launch a new product and have it into every store in the United States, not every, 90% all commodity volume stores in the United States within 3 or 6 months. If you've got a total grocery distributor network with no grocery direct chain warehouses carrying your product, you would be lucky in 2 years to have a 70% distribution. After 10 years of going to supermarkets, we now have a 66% all commodity volume distribution. Going direct, which we're doing more, increases our distribution, and it also decreases our out of stocks on our best items. That's a great opportunity. The downside of that one is that they tend to knock down prices in price wars with the different chains within a market. Our health food stores get ulcers thinking about it. Every time a chain decides to play price football with our tea, our health food stores go nutso. They can't compete with that channel of distribution. So we just pick up 10 points of distribution in New York City, and the chain that picks up the product decides they're going to special it, and then we get 50 phone calls from health food retailers. So it takes learning how, for us, to carry water on both shoulders.
Overall, how would you say this 3-channel distribution system has worked for Celestial Seasonings?
It has been a difficult set of circumstances, but overall it's worked very well for us. We have, with the advent of major competition for our company, through these different channels of distribution, we have been able to consistently stay the market leader and in general build upon our leadership position. All 3 channels are almost equal in size. The grocery direct business is a smidgen bigger than the other 2, but they're all very, very close to each other.
You know, I'd almost forgotten to ask you about middlemen. Earlier, Dr. Bowersock said they play a critical role and that you really can't eliminate the functions they perform. From your experience, how important are they?
They're important, and anyone that thinks they're not important should try cutting them out, and they'll see very quickly how important they are. And almost every business has a group of middlemen. It's like middle management in a company. And at times people hypothesize if we didn't have middle management, just think how great it would be. Top management works with the rank and file and everything goes along great, but it's really not that simple. It takes a whole lot of people to get the job done. And our distributors and our brokers, they're kind of middlemen as well, play a very important role for us. And any time that we forget that, we tend to get ourselves in big trouble. We often say around here that customer is king, and the customer for us is our distributors. And our brokers tend to be working for us as a part of our organization, and they just make a whole lot of difference. You really can't do it without them. It's about that simple.
What specifically do these middlemen do for you?
Our middlemen, our distributors, get our teas in stores that are difficult for us to reach. There are a number of chain warehouses in America that service a lot of independent stores. You can get your product listed into the chain warehouses, but they do nothing to pull your product out to the individual chains. They may be servicing a chain that's got 6 stores, another one that's got 3, another one that's got 9. So they'll list your product in their catalog but do nothing for you. If we give those stores to our distributors, they have people that go into the stores, set up the shelf space, put on our displays, and do all of these special things. They work on promotions, a whole series of services that we just can't get anywhere else.
So middlemen are extremely important.
Now, the big giant companies that have 2,000 people out there selling, they can do all of that themselves, but when we're one of those companies that we're kind of in between stage. We're not big and we're not small. We're kind of moving toward the middle ground. That middle ground is tough because you're competing with the biggest of companies, which we do. Our number 1 competitor is the largest food company in the world. And it takes a lot of tenacity on our part. We can't be as smart and we can't distribute as well as them. We have to be smarter and distribute better. So we have to really nurture those channels.
Okay, I think it's pretty clear why you do that as part of your distribution strategy. And now that we've had a look at that strategy, it naturally makes one curious about Celestial's physical distribution setup. Now, as you know, Mr. Siegel, earlier this week we had a camera crew there at your plant, and here's what we've put together. A look at Celestial Seasonings' physical distribution system.
In order to get products to their target market, Celestial Seasonings, like every company, had to create a physical distribution system. It consists of the activities that take place as goods move through their distribution channels, warehousing, order processing, materials handling, inventory control, and transportation. As soon as boxes of tea come off the packaging line, they are taken to the warehouse, where they are received, identified, sorted, and put into inventory.
Okay, and how many of those?
Most orders here come in by telephone or teletype.
Okay.
Order processing involves grouping the products a customer wants and developing paperwork, including shipping orders and requisitions from inventory. The orders are sent over the computer network to the warehouse. People in the warehouse are responsible for getting an order ready for shipment. That includes pulling the right products from inventory. There are lifts and other machines to help with materials handling. Meanwhile, people working in inventory control keep up with the amount of products stored in the warehouse and estimate the level of inventory needed for future orders. Their goal is to keep inventory costs down while having enough goods in inventory to serve their customers. An order that's been prepared for shipment is moved to the shipping dock, then loaded aboard a company truck for the journey to market. In some cases, an order is delivered to a public warehouse where it will be stored and later shipped to the customer. In other cases, Celestial Seasonings ships to the customer's warehouse. In either case, the tea's ultimate destination will be a store. There, cases of herb tea are received and displayed on store shelves where customers in the company's target market will have no trouble finding the tea they want to buy.
A journey to market from Celestial Seasonings plant in the Colorado Rockies to people across the country who enjoy a cup of their herb tea. Mr. Siegel in Boulder, Colorado, thank you for this visit to your company.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to have this opportunity.
And I'm Alex Burton, and this has been The Business File.
The preceding program is part of a college credit course.